So I'm just going to share a little bit about my story because it is kind of unconventional. But this whole seminar today was one of the free online offerings from the Good Karma Comedy Festival, which is something that was started originally by a comedian named Frank Vignola, who may be popping in later as well. And so he asked me to kind of get on here today and share a little bit of my story. And I know some people may already know it, but for me, it's always kind of fun to tell because if somebody said to me, I don't know, 4 years ago, hey, you're going to be going around the country telling jokes to people. I'd have said you're crazy. I'd have said that there's no way that's something that I'm going to do. Uh, and to me, that it was just something that I couldn't believe. I just couldn't imagine. I just couldn't imagine something like that happening. And so originally I was always someone who loved comedy. I always loved comedy. My wife and I were big like anytime we would go anywhere to a new city, we're like, oh, we got to find a comedy club. It'd be so great, to find some comedy. And there wasn't much around us. And right before the pandemic, we actually, our last date was at an indoor comedy club called Soul Joel's. We got some more people popping in. Wonderful. So, it was something for me. We went to this club. It was Soul Joel's. It was right before the pandemic. Nobody knew. Everybody was just thinking, oh man, it's just another day. It was actually Valentine's Day. And so we went to this club, and then all of a sudden the world shut down. And I just remember thinking, like, we stopped laughing. Like there was just nothing funny once we got to this sort of like the pandemic happened. And I just felt like that was so much of my wife and I's relationship was laughing. And I was like, oh man. So what we started doing in my house is we started watching Impractical Jokers. And for those of you who dropped in, please feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go along. I'm just going to kind of share a little bit of my story, and then we'll have some time to kind of chat in case you have some more questions. So yeah, my wife and I, we just weren't laughing. I was like, I want to be the change. And all of a sudden a Facebook ad popped up for that same club that we had gone to before the pandemic, and it was called Soul Joel's. And they were doing an outdoor venue that was socially distant, and they were doing a Tuesday open mic night. And my wife and I just went to be part of the audience. And we must have did that from October of 2020 through, November. We probably went 6 or 7 times because we had my mom living with us. It was our date night. So the girls were home with grandma. We went out for like 3 hours, and like people would come from everywhere to go up and do 4 minutes. And at the time, I just kind of had this inkling, like, I was like, I want to do something different. I'm a teacher. I've been a public school teacher for 20 years. And the workload during the pandemic was just so intense that I was just so miserable. And I needed something to like stop answering all the emails and try to stop saving the world at school. And I bought a couple books. That was like the first step I think I did is I bought two books in particular. I bought The Comedy Bible by Judy Carter, and I bought Mastering Stand Up by Stephen Rosenfield. And I immediately read the Mastering Stand Up. It was just an easy read. And then I started working through the Comedy Bible because it had like activities and stuff, and it had goal setting. And when New Year's was coming up of 2021, it was like 3 or 4 days before New Year's was that Tuesday. I just said to my wife, I'm going to get up there. I'm just going to do it. I wrote like a little monologue thing that I thought was going to be 4 minutes. It probably was 10 minutes of material that I shoved into 4 minutes because I spoke so fast. And I remember not getting a single laugh, except maybe a pity laugh about 3.5 minutes in. Um, I still have the set recorded, so every once in a while when I need like just a reminder of the beginning, I go back and watch it. And I remember people saying, we think you might have been funny, but you were talking too fast because the adrenaline, the nerves. But I was addicted. Regardless, in my mind, just getting up there was the victory. Like I had no dreams of what this would become. I just knew like this kind of tuning fork in me was going off, and it was like, oh, I got to keep doing this. It's like addicting. And it's like, I can't wait till next Tuesday. And I remember in March, I got sick, and it was around my birthday, and I stopped going for like 2 weeks. And my wife was like, hey, are you going to go back? And there was just something about it that I was like, well, I got off track. I don't know if I'm going to go back. And I remember going back and they took a photo of me. And to this day, I just never saw a photo where I felt like I was so happy. There's just this look on my face, and I just knew I couldn't miss another day. And that's when I said to myself, all right, if you're going to do this, set a goal. And that was something that the Comedy Bible was talking about at times, like set a goal. So I set a goal. I said, you know what? I'm going to do 100 open mics this year. And at that time, the only open mic was Joel's at Tuesday, and there was one in Gap in Phoenixville, close to me in the suburbs of Philadelphia on Monday. And then in Delaware, there was one on Wednesday. So I knew three. And I said, all right, 3 times 52 is 156. So, all right, technically I could do 156. I'm just saying 100. And I got to 100 within like 8 months because I hit all three and I just kept going. And I remember telling my best friend, I don't know if this comes through on the screen, but my best friend had oh, you can't see my virtual background, but he got me a trophy with a goat on the top of it. And he sort of was like just, saw that I had set a goal and I hit it. And he and I were always those kind of kids growing up where we wanted to support each other. And so he had sent that in the mail to me after I hit my like 100 open mics. And then I said, oh, I got to set a new goal. So then my second year, I said, all right, now that I got this goal, my next goal, I started putting things in the calendar. I want to host an open mic. I want to, maybe get a guest spot on a show. And I just started putting things in my Google Calendar, just like putting it out in the universe, the law of attraction, the secret, whatever you want to call it. I just started vision boarding it a little bit. And then every time I put something in my calendar, it came back like tenfold. I started getting asked to run a mic. I was, doing some of these things, and I was just pushing myself to do things that made me feel uncomfortable. And that was my goal. And then the second year I said, all right, I'm going to start doing social media because I saw people. So I joined Instagram, I joined TikTok, I joined, made a Facebook comedy page and started trying to kind of mess with content and, do some of those things. And, that was like sort of the next step. And I just tried to keep reaching for new goals, but the whole time I wanted to just keep writing too. I think that was one of the things that was impressed upon me early. I did take a class. So the book that I mentioned that I read first was Mastering Stand Up with Stephen Rosenfield. And I took that. He had an online class at that point, and you basically got 2 private writing sessions with him, and then you got like 3 group classes where essentially you basically ran through the set that you had been working on with him privately. And so it happened so fast because it's just in 2 weeks. And so I got to take a lot of the things that I had already been writing and share it with somebody who was a professional. And that really helped me kind of see what was what. Because when I was writing at first, I was writing like I was writing an essay because the only writing I ever did growing up was for school papers. So when I first started writing, it was very expository. It was very like editorial of the newspaper. And it wasn't really this whole set up, punch tag. I didn't really get what all of that meant at first. I would hear podcasts, they would talk about writing on stage. I was like, I don't even know what that means. But I knew to just keep writing. And I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, it's going to be a big block of marble. And when I figure it out, I'll just chip away like I'm Michelangelo, and hopefully David will, be left behind. And I would just take advice from anybody, So as I would go to these open mics, people would come up to me and they'd say, hey, I really like this. You should talk about X, Y, and Z. And I would always listen, and I would always take what they told me and I would try it. And I would go up on stage the next day, or I would do whatever. And I was not afraid to take constructive criticism. I was not afraid to hear what someone wanted to tell me. And I think that helped a lot. But a lot of my stories are just things about my life, right? Because really what was happening is I had lived a life. I was 38 years old at my first open mic, and that's not normal. I was hanging out with 18-year-olds, almost the same age I'm teaching during the day, I'm hanging out with at night. And but it was kind of cool. I accepted that. I was like, listen, I'm the old guy, I get it, but I got a story to tell. and that was something I realized is I wanted to tell my story. And if I told my story, I didn't have to worry about stealing jokes. I didn't have to worry about, did somebody else already do this joke? And so that's what I did. And so I looked at my life. I said, what about my life is interesting? And then I started realizing, oh, well, I teach Spanish and Latin. I don't look like this, and I teach Spanish and Latin. That first off is weird. I also went to 7 different schools as a kid because we moved a lot. And then I started looking at my family. I'm like, oh, I was raised by lesbians in 1980 Scranton. Like, oh, my parents actually, my mom and my dad had me, and then they both were like, hey, we're gay. So I was like, that whole can of worms is super interesting. I'm raising an autistic daughter. I don't know what it means to be a dad. I don't even know. I know I want to be a good one. I know I've watched a lot of Married with Children, and that's sort of the non-example. But I also know that there's something endearing about Al Bundy. So I kind of like want to embody some of those parts. And so was like, this was my time to just get on and tell my story and talk about the things that were happening to me that I just thought were funny. And that's what I did. And I think at the end of the day, what helped me get on stage more and more was like, listen, if I get up there for 4 minutes and I tell this story about whatever, nobody's going to be upset that they listened to me for 4 minutes. I'm not having a hot take on the Gaza Strip, but they were going to get an interesting story, and I was going to get something out that I've always wanted to talk about. And once I started doing that, and I was being honest and I was being myself on stage, I think people were more intrigued to hear. And so that gave me opportunities to keep sharing. And I think that was something that was really super important for me early on. Was to just get the stage time, and to have something to talk about. So like when I went to that mic every Tuesday, I made it a goal at first to go up with a new 4 minutes every week. So like when they saw me that week, I wasn't retelling the old jokes. I had a whole week to like write a new bit. And I think that was something that I don't know that I do as much of now. I mean, I'm always trying new stuff, but like now I'm at a level where some stuff needs polishing up. So I don't want to always do something brand new all the time, because I'm trying to kind of work something out. But that was my goal. I just wrote a new 4 minutes every week. And then my writing process, because I know some people often ask me about like, well, what do I do? I start a Google Doc, and I basically just, if there's an idea that I had, I just start writing it out kind of in long form a little bit, as I think I would tell it. And and then I just kind of let it be for a simmer it, and then I'll go back and I'll say, oh, look, did I really need to say all those words to get to this part that I think's funny? And I'll start kind of chopping it up. And now I just have a Google Doc. And what I do is whatever I title the bit, I put it in a header so that it shows up on this document outline, because some of my Google Docs are like 200 pages. I don't want to be scrolling 200 pages, but in Google Docs, you can open an outline and you can easily scroll through the outline, and I can kind of look, and it's usually in chronological order. So if it's a newer bit, it's towards the top. If it's an older bit, it's towards the bottom. And then I try, like every season, I try to like name a new Google Doc, 2024 summer, 2024 fall. And then I just kind of, go through that, and just kind of take those to the stage with me and try to, figure out what's what. And then if it gets good, if I like it and it's in my, repertoire, I used an app called Trello. That's Trello. And it's like, basically I think it's like a workflow app that people who are like project managers use for stuff. But you can create these boards, and then in this board, I can basically make all of these tiles that are movable. So I can I'll digitally write my set list out that way, and I can title it something. I can make a board. Now it has some limits on the free apps, but I've been able to get around it because then I just kind of keep reusing the boards. But when you click on one of the tiles, you can put information in there. You can do all sorts of stuff. But I like that I just had a digital version of what what it was going to be, and I could just kind of, you know put that and rearrange it on the fly, or I could kind of look at what the comics in front of me were doing and see if I thought something was going to work. And so Trello became sort of the landing area for the bits that I was willing to put into and actually do on stage. So it was kind of like my workflow was basically like, I would start with an idea. The idea I would put in something called Google Keep. That's Keep. And it's kind of like a little memo. It's like a little, I don't know, like a post-it kind of app. And so that's where my inclinations start. And then they go to Google Doc to write them out. And then they go to Trello, and it's sort of going to be in the act. And that for me was just how I kind of kept myself organized from idea to writing to performing. And that's sort of my deal a lot of times. I also do a notebook. Like, I know a lot of people go around with a notebook. I'm never going to remember that notebook. I'm going to leave it somewhere. I just have random notepads like all over my house that sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't. I do like to rewrite what I think my set list is going to be several times before I go on stage, because I think it helps me like solidify the order a little bit in my head by just kind of rewriting it. But yeah, that's sort of that kind of process. So I'm gonna take a beat because we had some people join, and I know some people came in at different parts. If anybody has any questions, please, if you can find the chat, feel free to drop anything in the chat. Um, so far I sort of shared where I started, how I started comedy, how I started at 38, how I started by talking a lot about my family. And I think the next part I want to segue into is sort of like when you pick your content, there's things you got to consider. I work fairly clean. And a lot of that was because I've been a public school teacher, and I was, that's my day job. That's what was paying the bills. So to go up and have potentially a parent be in the audience or a board member or somebody, I couldn't really go up there and tell dirty stuff because I felt like that could put my job at jeopardy. And, I didn't want that. So I've always kind of worked clean as a result of that. Um, but some of the other things I hadn't considered at first was sort of like getting permission to tell stories about other people. Like when I started talking about being raised by women and lesbians, I didn't consider my mom's feelings. My mom, when she came to the show, she's like, "Oh, you outed me," and I'm like, "Well, you're like 70 years old." Like I would have thought, but I hadn't considered sort of her mindset. So then I started kind of clearing jokes by her. I was like, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing this part. Here's the bit. What do you think?" And making those people part of the process. I think that's an important thing sometimes we don't consider is other people's feelings. And if you're going to post something online or you're going to do something like that, because I'm sharing so much about my life, I have to clear a lot with my wife. I don't really talk. I'm kind of a smart man. I don't necessarily talk about my wife unless I'm the idiot and she's the hero. And same with my daughter. I talk a lot about my autistic daughter, but she's always the hero of the story. She's always, I'm trying to, with her, that's really where my efforts are now with my writing. I really want to build an hour around her and how I've learned so much on how to raise her. I've learned what autism is because of her. And I hear so many comics use autism like it's their new R word, that I'm like, how can I like combat that? How can I, go up there after them talking about some dumb train joke and go up there and tell a different story and tell a different side. And I found a lot of ways to do that. And it's been a lot of fun because I've had so many people come up to me after a show whose parents or grandparents or know somebody who's autistic. And either they're like, that's exactly how it is. Or I've had kids who are autistic in the audience coming, that's how I was when I was your daughter's age. And now I'm X, Y, and Z. And I work for this. Or I just graduated college, and like that to me, I didn't realize. Like I had one woman come up to me, and like we both were like, she's like, I needed to laugh so I didn't cry. And we both like kind of were hugging each other at the end of this. And it was like so emotional. Like I'm emotional right now just remembering how emotional I was there. And I didn't realize, the profound effect I was going to have on other people who felt like I felt. And I think that's when social media started helping me, because what I started doing is I started using social media to kind of to almost as an open mic, where if I had an idea, I really wanted to talk about it, but I didn't know if it was relatable or people were into it. I would do one of two things. I would either write something on Facebook and post, and then I would kind of see who liked it and if comments happened. And some things you would hit a hot button, you wouldn't realize it, and people would have all of these comments on it. And sometimes they didn't get the joke, and that's fine, but people were excited to talk about it. So I think the social media aspect for me was like, oh, if I floated an idea out there and all these people liked it that I haven't heard from in years, who clearly had been paying attention to my page, but just hadn't been engaging. And all of a sudden, this was the thing that got them to engage, or this sparked a discussion in the comments section. Or like what I've realized now, I couldn't figure out TikTok for the longest time. I just couldn't figure out how to get more than like 300 views. And then all of a sudden, recently, I started posting a lot of the stories about my daughter that were real things that I was processing so that I could tell on stage. And I would tell the story to the camera, and all of a sudden, I've got a couple things from last week. They're hitting like 16,000 views and like so many comments. And I had a joke that another comic clipped up for me, a guy named James McElhaney, who runs a thing called Rue Comedy. He does brilliant editing work. And a lot of social media is how good is the editing to kind of get into the algorithm. Almost like if you were going to get into a club and you showed up in shorts or you weren't dressed properly, the bouncer wouldn't let you in. I think sometimes the algorithm on social media kind of looks at your framing, looks how good the captions are, and it decides, are you okay to get into the club? Are you going to get into the mainstream so that more people are going to see this? And I had one of his clips is now at like 3.7 million views, and it's got like 160,000 likes, but it's got like hundreds of thousands of shares and comments. People constantly, it was just hearing so many people tell their story in the comments or say they related to it. And so that really helped me be like, oh, people want to hear this stuff. People want to engage with this stuff. And I want to talk more about it. And so that's sort of been, I think for me, the last few months has been like, oh, I need to talk more about her, which is exciting because I pretty much have from now till April. I'm going to be doing an autism show in April. And so I'm really building towards what's going to be that 35, 40-minute autism set that I'm going to tell on April 3rd. And so right now I have a lot of new shiny toys about my daughter. To give you kind of a hardcore example of what that means, like 2 weeks ago, we had to ban YouTube for my daughter because she was scripting, which just means that she was hearing something and then she just kind of plays it like one of those Pee Wee Herman dolls that I used to have in the 80s. She just has the phrases and she just uses them all the time, but she doesn't always use them at the right time, or she uses a phrase that she shouldn't be using. And she got in trouble at school. And so we decided, all right, no more YouTube unless mommy and daddy are watching it with you. And I had to tell her this. And she's not someone, you can't just have like a normal conversation with her. She's very transactional. And on the way to music class, I told her, and she started having a meltdown in the back of the car, and she's crying like her world is ending. Because a lot of it she's emoting like she's seeing in some of the comics she is reading. So she's like over emoting about her feelings. And so she starts doing her coping mechanism. She's like breathing, she's singing. One of the new things they had her do is write or draw. So I had a notepad. So I like one of my comic notepads I threw in the back, and I'm like, here, baby, why don't you write? And so she starts writing, she calms down, and she hands it back to me and she says, don't look at this. And I said, all right. So the next day I found it on the front seat and I turned it over and it said, sneaky ways to watch YouTube. And she made like a 5-point list of 5 steps on how to watch YouTube. And I'm like, oh my God. But she didn't write YouTube, she drew the app because she's very visual. And I've had jokes about how her brain's like a Google image search. So she drew the little square with the play sign in it for YouTube. And then I'm reading and I couldn't figure out what step, I still have no idea what step 1 is, but in the bit, I'm like, it's go in the house. But then step 2, she wrote, get a knife. And I'm like, what? And then step 3 was attack daddy. And she's like this angelic little 9-year-old, like, and I'm like, attack daddy. And then step 4 was when daddy moves out. I'm like, okay, well, I'm still alive because I'm moving out. So that's good. And then it was like step 4 was after daddy moves out, sneak into mom and dad's room. And then step 5 was watch YouTube. And I was like, part of me was like, kind of, I was like, is she really gonna like attack me? Like what? But I still kind of found something funny about it. I was like, that's still kind of funny because I don't think she's gonna do it. She must have seen something where and she was manifesting that. And so now I'm trying to take that bit and do it on stage. And so one of the things I did to sort of adapt it a little bit is when I tell it on stage, instead of get a knife, I say trick daddy. And then I just make a big deal about what the hell does that mean? Like, and then the next step instead of attack daddy is tie daddy up. And then it's like, sneak into mom and dad's room, watch YouTube. And then the end of the bit so far in this draft form I'm at is so then I was up all night. So I called the school the next day. I'm like, I'm not too concerned. I got like 275 pounds on her. But like I called the school and I'm like, listen, why don't we just stop all of her therapies? And they're like, why would we stop her therapies? I'm like, well, if she learns how to tie her shoes, I think I'm next. And that's sort of like where I took it because I felt like if I talked about what she really did, but I've had a lot of the comics where I showed them the actual note and they're like, no, you got to tell like the real version. So now I'm sort of trying to figure out how can I tell the real version? Am I going to, like last night I did it and I did the real version and I kind of felt like I lost them a little bit on it. So that's something where I kind of got to go back now and say, well, did I lose them? I got to keep doing it. I got to keep telling it both ways to sort of understand how I can do that. And so sometimes, you kind of get in an impasse with things. And if you're not going to a different room and you're telling the same bit, you're not going to get that authentic info. So fortunately, I drive a lot. I put like 2,000 miles on my car a month, just going to different gigs and stuff, because I track it all for my taxes. Um, so like eventually I'll get to enough rooms where I can tell it in enough places where I can sort of find the sweet spot. But like I know that's going to be a big bit. That's going to be like I know it's not there yet. It just happened 2 weeks ago, but I know it's going to be like a cornerstone piece of this set I'm building. I just don't know yet, and that's kind of frustrating because like I wish it was done, but I'm just going to need to kind of keep telling it to kind of figure out um where, and I just got to listen to like if people like obviously up front when they hear sneaky ways, they love that. And I've also noticed that when I say that she didn't write YouTube, she drew the symbol, people like that part. And then obviously when it says get a knife, like I almost need to figure out how I'm gonna what I'm gonna say after I reveal that part. Like, and it's got to be like I'm having this conversation with the crowd like where I'm reacting to them. So I almost have to like have several versions of it based on how the audience reacts. So I just have to tell it enough to kind of and be vulnerable enough in that moment to just react with them. Because that's one of the compliments that I think I've gotten the most is uh, people, and somebody just mentioned this the other day to me, was just that the connection I can get with an audience. Like one of Mark Riccadonna, who's one of the guys that's part of this Good Karma Comedy Festival. He's a great guy. He said, my superpower is my likability, and people want to connect with me. They want to hear, and so I think I've been trying to get to a place where I understand that when I'm in the moment. I'm a big baseball guy. I think baseball and comedy have a lot of similarities, and I'm starting to see the spin on the ball now. I'm starting to see the pitch is coming in a little slower for me now, but I feel like it took eons to even feel like the grass was growing on that. But like, yeah, so like that's an example of a story that I'm trying to mine from that as well. Yeah, and Frank's been one that's always kind of been so helpful too, because I work a lot with Frank Vignola, who's the director of the festival. And he's always helped me, like I told you earlier, when I write and I kind of write like this expository, like I'm writing an article. He's one to just be like, okay, you just wrote a story. It's a great short story, make a great article in the newspaper, but how are you going to tell that on stage? How are you going to get the cadence and the delivery down that you're not saying too much, or some of those things, and having those kind of people in your life that you can rely on, that are mentors and coaches, because there's a lot of people out there like Frank, like Mark Rodana, who do individual coaching. And if you find somebody that you vibe with and you like their content, some of them are more than available to and offer sessions and offer private sessions. So if you find somebody you work well with, I encourage you to reach out to them and try to get that, because I think that'll help you grow, because you're so sometimes too close to the story. You need another perspective, you know. Another piece that I think I hear a lot of comics, and I talk to a lot of comics about, are open mics, and sometimes stories that I'll tell at an open mic, you won't get a great reaction at an open mic, but it might be a great bit to tell an actual audience. And sometimes that's frustrating, because you would want to think that if you go to an open mic, it's like a simulated show, but it's often not like a simulated show. It's often a bunch of comics who are staring at their own material. And if you do go up, they're half listening to you. They're in their own other world. And the only thing that they'll laugh at is something ridiculous, shock factor stuff, which is not my ideal. Thankfully, because I'm like storytelling a little bit, it is engaging to them because it is so unusual to hear at some of these open mics to have someone share a story like this. And it's not a dad joke per se, even though it is a dad joke. So it's interesting. I don't know. I'm just so fascinated by the whole world of it. And where I'm at now, I got some really lucky breaks, but like what I think happened is I learned how to network. Every time I went to a new mic, I would talk to whoever ran it, I would thank them. I would always try to, when the first time I was at a mic, I would try to do like my best stuff so they knew like I was a comic. Or I'd always, even if I was going to work on a joke that I hadn't done much, I would sandwich it in the middle. That way I can like start with a strong joke so that everybody there was willing to listen to me because they're like, oh, okay, this guy's a comic. He's not just a rando off the street that needs therapy. I mean, I do need therapy, but I'm not a rando off the street. So I'm like, all right, let me start with a strong 15 to 30-second joke to get them their attention. Tell a joke or so about me and who I am so that they could get to know me. Then maybe the bit that I'm working on that I'm not as confident on, and then end strong so that I also feel good. And you want, even if you're a shitty restaurant, if you have good dessert, odds are people will come back because they'll remember the last thing. So I try to sandwich it in the middle, if it's something new. Uh, and that, and now because I'm getting so many opportunities to do shows, I can start working out bits in the show. Like last night, for example, I worked out 3 new bits um, that were sort of in the middle of it that I wanted to tell. So last night was one of the first times I didn't just go to a show and try to just do my best stuff. I didn't even tell like the 3 jokes that I would consider are strong enough jokes that I would end a set on. I didn't even tell any of them because I ran out of time because I was working out these things in the middle. And so I left the stage not feeling good because I was so used to ending strong. But when I listened back, I was like, oh, it sounded great. Like, so that's another thing I would say is when you're out there and you're doing your thing in your head, I don't know, you might have an idea in your head of how it's going, and it might not be like that. You might in your head be like, I'm so nervous right now. I used to feel like I was going to throw up before I would get on stage, every time. And now it's like, I get up there, you're comfortable, the more reps you do with it. And in my head, I think one way, but then when I get off and I listen back, I'm like, oh, it didn't sound like to them. I mean, inside I was an internal mess. It's like if you ever watch the Inside Out movies, those people were talking hard during my setup here, but nobody else was privy to that conversation. And because I was able to kind of keep that inside, nobody was seeing evidence of that unless it was somebody who really, really knows me. Again, like a pitcher. Sometimes when you're looking at like these pitchers now, they tip their pitches, they do something to kind of reveal what pitch they're about to throw, but only people who study them would know. So your average person isn't realizing that you're having this internal battle, so just realize there's always like a voice inside your head that's not reality. So I record everything, even if I can't video record, I audio record every set I do. And then I listen back to it on the car ride home, like immediately, because if I don't, I'll never listen to it. So like on my ride home, I always listen back, even if I don't want to, even if I don't want to hear my own voice, um, just so I can get a good take on that. And I coached baseball forever. And when we finally started using video, I think that was the first time that I felt like kids were getting it. Because at first they're like, oh, it was all off of how they felt. Well, you could convince yourself you had a killer set. I remember when I was first getting shows, I was like, man, I'm even texting my friends. I'm like, man, I killed it. I slayed it. And then I'd listen back and I'm like, it was okay. Like it was fine. People were laughing, but it wasn't like uproarious laughter. So you can convince yourself one or the other. But if you listen back, I mean, the laughter's there or it's not, and it's at a decibel. And if you've been in that room and you've heard other comics do even better, like I used to travel a lot with Frank. Frank can just go up and it's like watching A-Rod take batting practice. Like he's been doing it so long, and it's just flowing through his veins that he can just go up there. So I'd go up for 30 minutes in front of him to like a cold audience and, do my thing. And then I get up there and I'd be like, oh, I hear they have a new level of laughter. There's a new decibel that's been unlocked in this room. And that sometimes was disheartening at first, but then you got to remind yourselves like you're at a different spot, you're at a different place. There's other reasons why, and you got to keep working, you just got to keep putting the time in, um and that evidence will be there eventually if you stick with it long enough. But if you don't stick with it long enough, you know um you do that. And then, and people want to say, well, how do you get in at the clubs? Like, that's another great thing, is like, well, getting in the clubs is hard. Like, I'm still not technically in. Like, I've performed at Punchline, I performed at Helium several times, but because I networked with a lot of comics, and sometimes I've even sent like direct messages to people who were coming to Philly to say, hey, I'm a teacher. I've had a couple teacher comedians do that, where I've hit them up in instant message, and some of them got back to me and said, hey, yeah, I'd love to, if you could, because some of them want locals that can bring people to the show. So there's always currency to be in exchange for this stuff. So whether it's networking and you run a show and they're looking for time because they're prepping for a new hour, and you have a room and you can offer them some of those things. So maybe you can offer them something, even if you're just an open micer who has a bar show. That's what I did. I found a bar nearby me that let me produce a show. And all of a sudden I was able to sort of, have something to offer. But like with Soul Joel, I started there, right? And then he moved around. That's where I was going to the open mic, but he didn't know me. I mean, I wasn't on his radar at all. And then over time, because I was running these other rooms, a guy I know, Steve Rinaldi, was coming to my mic because he lived nearby me and he wanted time. And he had a family and stuff, so he wasn't trying to go down to the city. So he came by, I'd give him as much time as he wanted. And he was so grateful. He was starting to run a show at Soul Joel's, and he said, hey, why don't you, come do some time? And there had been so much separation from when Joel saw me at the open mic to now. And I was also starting to get in with this teacher tour that was national, that I was just very lucky to get into, that all of a sudden I had built up some momentum. I had direct messaged a guy that was coming to Punchline, who was a teacher comedian, who was just on the cusp of blowing up. He just got a Netflix show. He's got like a syndicated podcast. He gave me 10 minutes. There was a guy on that show from the board teachers who then pitched me to them. And then I got there. And so it was just this serendipitous thing that I couldn't have planned. It was just show up, get as many opportunities as you can, reach out to people, ask for time, have something to offer in return. And then it snowballed from there. And then all of a sudden, whenever Joel would have someone who was a clean comic, or whenever he would have a teacher comedian, he'd say, hey, do you want to come host? And then I started hosting more. And then Steve Rinaldi and I pitched him like, hey, could we do a late night, kind of like an open mic-ish showcase after one of your busier shows on a Saturday, where we hold the audience and we give comics a chance to kind of come up, and it just kind of snowballed. And, because I keep working on new material, and anytime I would go up there, I treated it like it was the World Series. Every time I'd go to a mic, every time I step on a stage somewhere, I treat it like it's the bottom of the ninth and the game's on the line, and I'm there to perform. Um, and that's worked for me. I just, because I don't have a lot of time, I'm old. It's like I got to make an impact, and I got to make an impact now. And so that was something that I said to my wife. I was like, hey, I go out a lot. I mean, I go out 6 nights a week. I have two small kids. I teach. I mean, you can only be pulled in so many directions. So I have to be intentional with my time. And my wife and I had to have a conversation. We had to say, like, hey, now that I realize this isn't just church softball on a Sunday afternoon, and we can make some money off of this, and we can have some opportunities off of this. Hey, I'm, you're gonna have to take a brunt with some of the kids and stuff. We're gonna have to work out a division of labor, so that I can kind of pursue. Like, even yesterday, I mean, I drove 4 hours round trip to do that spot up there, but it was 24 minutes that I got. So I drove 4 hours for 24 minutes. I got paid. I got some food. When I say I got paid last night, it was a charity gig, so it wasn't great. It was it cost me in tolls and gas, but not by much. But I knew those days are going to have to come. So if you're looking for money and you're looking for that kind of stuff, I mean, when I met Frank, I don't even know if Frank knows this, and I'm sure he does. Frank, the reason I met Frank, he was doing a show in my hometown of Carbondale, Pennsylvania. I'm like, Carbondale is comedy. Um, and so I reached out to him, and then and that's how we became Facebook friends. And then he had a gig and he needed a ride. And I was like, oh, that's like something very old school. Like I remember hearing some of the older comics say, yeah, we would like pick people up and that's how you get time. Well, I said, oh yeah, I'll take you up there. And he's like, well, I gotta be honest, it's not my show. I don't even know if I can get you stage time. And I was like, well, no, I mean, I get to pick your brain for the ride up. I get to watch the show with the other comics. Like to me, I was like, I'm just happy to be there. Now I was able to do, I think like 8 minutes I did. But it was a crazy ride because I'm nowhere near him. So I drove like 2.5 hours up to Astoria, picked him up. Then we drove 2 more hours up to Connecticut. I did the 8 minutes and I drove him back to Astoria and then I drove back to Philly. So that was 8 hours. And yeah, and I didn't reveal this yet. I drive a Prius and it was in the middle of a snowstorm. So my wife, I was like, oh, I'm going to take this guy up to this show. And that's all I said. If you mention Connecticut to my wife, I'm sleeping on the couch for the next month. Like we don't say the words Connecticut. I'm pretty sure we'll never ever go to Connecticut as a family. But had I not done that, there were several people I met that night, in addition to Frank, who I got to have great conversation with him on the ride there and back and pick his brain. But like Peaches Rodriguez, who I've done several shows with now, and Max Dolcelli, who does a lot of cruise ships, which is something I'm fascinated by. So now I would love to maybe someday do cruise ships. So I got to like see a lot of these comedians of so many different styles because there's so much success. There's so many levels of success. It's like baseball again. There's not just the major leagues. There's all of these side leagues and all of these other things where you can kind of live and sustain yourself. That it gave me an example to do that, but I had to be willing and crazy enough to do those things, and I was. And so I think my craziness and wanting this, and my mom, who's actually on the call right now, I just saw, but like, she said to me at one point, she's like, when you say you're going to do something, you mean it. And like, that's what happened. I just said, well, I love this. And now it's just like, it's like a tuning fork going off in me that I can't not listen to. And COVID was taught me that like, hey, I'd been putting all my life into education and it's been a lot of unrequited love there because the system's broken. The school I work for is broken. I'm not undervalued and underappreciated. And I don't have time for that anymore. COVID taught me that if it doesn't have fuck yes energy, then I'm a strong no. So now I do what I need to do. Still a good teacher. I go and I do my job, but I don't do anything more than that. I used to do everything for that school because now I'm taking care of my own family, and then at night I'm going out and doing comedy. And so now I've created this kind of resume for myself that now that I step back, the book I mentioned that I read first, Mastering Stand Up, the author of that, Stephen Rosenfield, I'm now his assistant. So I'm the director of operations for the American Comedy Institute, which is New York City's longest running comedy school. It's in its 35th year. Uh, I run the comedy school at Soul Joel's now. So my picture's on the wall now there. I run a comedy class. There's a couple of my students in this one as well. I travel with board teachers. I've been with them for like 2.5 years now. So I travel over the country with them. I've, been to like probably 15 different states. They fly me everywhere. They pay for everything. It's great. I get to fly down to Florida every once in a while and record a podcast with them uh and do all this crazy stuff. I'm going to Cancun, Mexico with them in July for their like doing a resort takeover for teachers in the summer. So I'm getting all these kind of cool opportunities. Uh and I'm working pretty regularly. Like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'm booked out into January, February now, which is kind of cool. And so, and it's just one of these things. I really believe in this kind of vision boarding. I really believe in this kind of, putting it out there and kind of manifesting it, because those kind of things, um, I think are real. Like if you can, if you put that out there and you work hard at it, I think you can make it happen. And I've had a lot of luck, too. But that's, you work hard, then when luck comes, you're ready to step through the door. And I think that's the ticket is, and sitting down and forcing myself to write isn't always the answer. But when something strikes me, I got to stop, put a minute, and take a minute to write that. So, our lives are always busy. There's always a million things we could be doing, but try to set some time aside for yourself, even if it's like an hour before everybody gets up on a Sunday morning in your house. Like that's what I used to do when I was meeting at first. I would like 7 a.m. before everybody was up was my time to go down to the basement and write. So, you can find yours. And even if just getting up on stage can just be the victory, there's so many levels of success. You have to define what success is for you, and you have to define how much time you're able to put into this, if that's something that you're looking to do. And that's also kind of really important. And then, go to mics. When you go to a mic, be in the mic. Don't, listen to other people's sets. Try to learn from them. Try to watch. I used to write people's attitudes down. I'm like, oh, what's their persona? Because I think the first 7 years, people, Steve Martin was one who said the first 7 years, you're trying to figure out who you are on stage. You know, I think for me, because I was a public school teacher for 20 years, those skills were transferable. I kind of know who I am, but I'm still trying to figure out how do people see me on stage, because I might go up there and think I'm one way, but I don't know how the audience sees me all the time. How you dress, how you present yourself, all of that goes into what people are going to think of you the minute you step on stage. And so all of that kind of has to be factored in, even how you dress. So, um, I think a lot about those things now that I didn't at first. I think, like I said, I use social media to my advantage. I just hit 40,000 followers yesterday on Instagram, which again, I work with people on the Board Teachers Tour that have like 200,000 followers. But like to know that I grew that in the matter of 3 years. I mean, it's only been 3.5 years since I did my first open mic. That's unusual. And I don't take that for granted. So sometimes when people talk to, or I run into comics and they're like, "Oh, how long you been doing this?" I try to be very vague because I don't want to, I don't. I know some people scoff at anything under 7 years. When you kind of get into the realm of it, but it's so cool for me because I'll walk into a club. I mean, I've walked into a club in New York City. I've walked into clubs in Healy, and like somebody always knows me now, and that blows my mind. But I think it's just as a kid who went to 7 different schools, I just learned how to network. I learned how to meet people. I learned how to, kind of blend in. Um, and it's an honor to kind of have people, remember me or know me, or, like I said, all those people that come up to me after the show and say, "Hey, my kid's autistic," or this or that. That's what I'm doing it for. I'm doing it for the connection of people. And um, you know, that's what comedy is, right? It's like, how do you make a group of strangers friends for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes? And that's kind of fun. It's fun to a challenge to say, can I make this room of strangers my friends for the next 10 minutes? Um, and that's sort of how I approach it, when I get on stage, every time. All right. Well, we're sort of at the part now where I was kind of like, I've talked a ton. Does anybody have any questions? You can either unmute yourself, or if you have the chat and you want to just type it. Um, I kind of want to give the floor for our last 10 minutes together in case anybody wants to know a little bit more about something or miss something I said. And I think you can even raise your hand. There's all sorts of stuff you can do in Zoom, but get my attention somehow. I think what else I had written down. Talked about writing process. I will say something I didn't realize is the size of a room I'm in. I mean, I've played shows to 2 people in a bar with the TVs on. And I think the largest space I've done is about 3,000 people in a theater. And obviously those are very, very different worlds. I'll never forget my first board teacher show was the Kodak Theater. Oh, I have the poster right here. February 22nd, 2023. Um, I did a show there at the Kodak Theater. It was a snowstorm then too. I didn't have to drive that time. 1,700 people. Um, and I just remember I went there early, so it was before the doors open, and I went on stage and I FaceTime my family and my two daughters, and my one daughter was like 7. And I showed her the big theater that was empty at the time from the stage. And she looked at me, she's like, Daddy, I'm nervous for you. And I was like, I felt that nerve. I remember being in the hotel room before they sent the Uber over to take us to the venue and just being like, wow, like what am I doing here? Like, am I worthy of, like, you're always gonna have those feelings, like, am I worthy of this moment? Um, like, wow, I was getting paid a sum of money that I could not have I once got, I think the first time I ever did comedy, I got $7 from a tip jar that they passed around, and my wife framed it. It's like a 5 and 2 ones. Um, but like, so it's like to think that somebody was paying me a few more zeros after that to do this show. I'm like, there was added pressure, but at the same time, I didn't want to not enjoy the moment too, and so again, thankfully, all the time I prepared to go into it, and it went great. It was such a feeling and a rush to hear 3,000 people. What I didn't realize, and Pat House is a comedian, who, oh great, that's a great question. I'll get to that in a second. Pat House is a comedian that is in Philly. He travels all over the country. He would just open him for Brad Williams all weekend, traveling up the East Coast. Um, he mentioned to me at an open mic we were both at, he's like, listen, I see you're doing these theaters. He's like, just realize you're going to have to slow down even more than you've ever slowed down before, because your voice has to travel to the back of the theater and back. And that laughter is going to come in differently because you have so many people laughing, that you're going to have to go slower. So you're not going to be able to tell as many jokes as you think you're going to be able to tell. Because I was at a point where I voice recorded all my bits, so I knew down to the second how long that joke was. Oh, that's a 30-second joke. That's a 90-second joke. That's a 45-second joke. I had watched a comedian early on. Her name was K-Mac. She's out of Delaware. She knew all her bits and timing. And I was like, oh, that's smart. So when my bits were polished, I would record myself in my cadence. And then my voice recorder would just tell me, oh, that's a 45-second bit. I can do that. I had to adjust that a little bit for that, and just realize that. And that was great. It's great to sit there and enjoy laughter. It's less I have to do. Like, that's awesome. Somebody, Carla from Jersey, wrote, how do you deal with that pressure of a huge gig with big pay? I, I'll tell you what, the newest thing for me is I'm starting getting schools inviting me in, and I'm doing 45, 60 minutes talking to their staff and doing comedy, but it's like in the daytime, like it's in the daytime. And I was very nervous because the sum of money I was getting paid for that was even more than I had expected. Um, and so I just prepare, prepare, prepare. I just over prepare. I want to go in there and know that they're going to get that. But then I also, Devin Siebold, who's on the tour with me and does a lot of professional speaking, he said, listen, the bar's low. So he like always like, remember those teachers, like I've sat in those meetings. So to have me up there, I just remember that, like, I have something to offer. I'm here for a reason. Like, I put in this work. People asked me to be here. Like, at some point I had to believe in myself because others were believing in me too. And so I think once you allow yourself to believe in yourself, you can take some of that pressure off, because the proof's in the pudding. Like, I have a product, I have something I'm proud of. And as long as I know that I've prepped it and I know the order, and um, then I'm ready to go. And so I know I'm going to put that show on, and I know that I've prepared. And I think that's just the teacher in me that knew that. So I think as long as I prepared and I've done all the work I could, then it's like when I was a kid in school. Like, if I studied for the test, I'm not going to cram right before, because I know I've done what I needed to do. So I think a lot of it's just, I know the hard work I put in, and I know how hard I prepared for it. And I think that helps me take some of that pressure off, um, because I know I'm going to deliver, and I know at least I have a message and I have a story to tell. So believe in yourself, I guess, is the ultimate message. All right. Well, give a chance for one last question. If anybody has anything other than that, I can't thank you. I didn't know if anybody was going to show up for this, so it's like I recorded it just so I would have it, because like I said, I record everything.
Hey,
uh
Jay, this is Mark, Coastal Connecticut. I
oh,
have
no,
a question.
no, sorry, no Connecticut, no Connecticut.
Yeah, don't tell your wife. Hey,
Yeah.
thanks for doing this, but I don't have a question, but I just want to say I'm very happy to hear um your comments about open mics because for a number of years I have kind of felt the same way that your success or failure at an open mic is not at all translatable to a show. A real show because an open mic often is a bunch of other comedians who, as you say, they have their nose buried in their own notebook, or they're of that mindset that sometimes they see the setup coming, and
Yeah.
it can be very clicky and they're not really paying attention. In fact, I'm just glad that to hear that I'm not the only one who feels that way about open mics. I'm not saying not to do them. They're great, to get your reps in and stuff like that. But just thanks for saying that because I don't want to feel like I was in a vacuum feeling that way about them.
No, I think that's so important. I think because it is, you're right. Like it's good to get the beats out. It's otherwise I'd be sitting them. There's the pressure of getting on a stage, even if there's just people there. Sometimes it's just conquering that pressure of getting on stage and
Yeah,
talking to the mic. And you're right. That is so there is some value there, but don't hang your hat. Like don't let that be the decision of one, whether you try that bit or never do it again. Never let a open mic tell you that. And but yeah, like that's so important. But it does have some value, and you never know who's in that room that might really be enjoying you and might get a show from that. Like because you went up there in that environment and still did your thing. I
yeah.
heard a great story about Chris DiStefano. When he finally got his first late night set, it was after he bombed at Rodney Dangerfield's club in New York because they wanted to see that he could handle eating shit in front of like an audience that wasn't listening.
Mm-hmm.
He was ready to go on TV in case it didn't go his way. He would react a certain way. Um, and I think that that was you never know who's in the room. You don't know who's in the room. You don't. So yeah, you got to
Yeah.
act as if and be prepared, but also don't hang your whole hopes on how that audience reacts.
Yeah, I don't think it's a good barometer for material. I don't.
No.
I agree with you. Oh, thanks again though for doing this.
I thank you guys for coming. I know, just being part of it. I don't know if you guys are part of the Good Karma Comedy Festival or you just fought, but either way, I'm glad you're here. Make sure you follow Good Karma. He's been doing a couple of them throughout the year. So it's a great way, especially early on, to get a credit. Festivals are a huge helper for that first step. And sometimes festivals have people from industry, like Church of Satire is a great indie club in Central PA. It's a huge partner of this. And they do some great stuff and they give a lot of great opportunities. So if you're looking for those, there's a lot of ways to kind of get your foothold in. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. Jay Yoder Comedy on all the platforms. Send me a message, whatever. If you're ever by Soul Joel's, come on by. I do a late night laughs there. I think November 9th is my next show there. I'll be up in New York this coming Friday at Gotham for the American Comedy Institute. So if you have any interest in that and you want to kind of see what a show looks like, it's only $14. We're in the side room, the Vintage Lounge at Gotham this Friday. It's a 6:30 p.m. show. Doors open at 6. I'd love to have you there. I host that show, and you could kind of get a chance to see some of the talent that take the workshop and what that would look like. So if any of you are up in New York City this Friday, come on by. Thank you very much. I know Frank also thanks you for coming as well, and hopefully I'll see you guys in real life soon.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, guys.